Hello book lovers and welcome back or welcome to Nakat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to give you some spooky fall recommendations. So I'm going to do this recommendation list a little bit different than I usually do. Usually I give a recommendation list of usually about 5 books, to be honest, just to keep it short and sweet. However, I was kind of looking through the books that I have read in about the last year and decided that I wanted to go about this a little bit differently. And so instead of just giving 5 fall recommendations, I have decided to create 4 different categories. These are just categories that kind of really stood out to me as I was looking at these list of books. So hopefully it'll help you decide a little bit easier if this is a book that you would enjoy. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the first category. So category 1 is probably going to be the category that is the hardest to read because you are reading from the point of view of people that are not really good, people that you aren't 100% rooting for. But I did notice that I had 3 books that were from the point of view of a psychopath and that I quite enjoyed them and figured you might quite enjoy them as well. The first one is a very recent read, and that is going to be At Night, All Blood is Black by David Diop. This is a work that has been translated from French, and we are following a Black serial killer who is a member of the French army during World War I. Now, I ended up rating this book a 3.5, which may seem a little bit on the lower side compared to other books that I often put in my recommendation videos. However, what I struggled with was the writing style, and writing styles are very subjective. You guys could love it. It may just not have been for me. Everything else in this book I thought was excellently done. My issue with the writing style is that it is repetitive. So if you're not a big fan of repetitive writing, maybe it's not the book for you. I will say that this book is under 150 pages, so it was tolerable to get through because it wasn't like 300 pages of repetitive writing. But still, it has to be something that you're into. As far as the story itself goes, I don't want to go too deep into it because, like I said, it is essentially a novella. But we are following a man who has kind of woken up and realized that for the first time, he wants to act as a human would act. In his mind, the way a human would act is to kill those who have killed what is his. Essentially, he has lost a friend to the enemy, and this breaks something in him. This book, the writing, despite being repetitive, is very leaning towards disturbing and uncomfortable. The descriptions that the author makes of our character's thought process and the actions that he take definitely make you feel uneasy, which is what you want from the point of view of a serial killer. I think what really shows that an author knows how to write a serial killer is when they're able to express their beliefs in such a way where you as the reader can in a way agree with them. You're like, it seems reasonable because it's reasonable to the character. So for the author to be able to make it seem reasonable to the reader shows you how skilled this author is at putting you into the headspace of this character. I also really enjoyed the commentary on when is it okay to be a killer. We are following a serial killer who is a soldier. Sometimes he's killing and it's okay, but at other times he crosses some sort of imaginary line, and who gets to decide where that line is. Like, when have you killed too much? When have you killed too gruesomely? So I really did enjoy the commentary aspect of this story. That's probably the strongest of it, and it is definitely a thought-provoking story. So definitely a book worth checking out. I haven't heard too many other people discussing it yet, but hopefully it starts to get a little bit more traction here in the States. The next book is a YA book. So if you want to kind of like introduce yourself to the psychopath in a more mellow, less intense manner, may I suggest Cherish Pharaoh by Bethany Morrow. I listened to this as an audiobook and I quite enjoyed it in that format. In this book, we are following Farah, and she is best friends with one of the few other Black girls at her school named Cherish. The difference between Farah and Cherish is that Cherish is actually the adopted daughter of two wealthy white parents. Farah, on the other hand, is not the daughter of wealthy white parents or even white parents. And one day her parents let her know that due to their work, they are going to have to move. And Farah is not okay with this. So she tells her parents that she is moving in with Cherish, and Cherish's family allows this. And as Farah starts to kind of ingratiate herself with this family, or as the synopsis says, manipulate herself into the family, she starts to realize that maybe she's not the only person who's willing to hurt others to get what she wants. I would say that this book very much has Get Out vibes. However, instead of following some sort of innocent bystander who is completely taken off guard by what is happening to them, we have ourselves a young psychopath, or sociopath for sure, who is willing to accept the pain that is inflicted on her if it gets her closer to a position where she can inflict pain right back. So I really thought that her relationship with Cherish was very interesting. Cherish is a rather weak character. Not that she's weakly written, she is just, that is her characteristic. She's just a sheep. You know, she'll follow whoever the strongest voice is, and Farah is making sure that it is her voice. And just watching her as she is kind of turning this girl against her own family and her own family's beliefs was pretty interesting and honestly kind of satisfying to watch. I would say in this case, this is one of those books where you are, for the most part, rooting for our little sociopath, psychopath, and that those she hurts have what's coming to them. I would say concept-wise, the book isn't the most original, but because we are following it from this specific character's point of view, it gives us kind of a fresh outlook on the racist people be doing the craziest things trope. All right, and the final book under this category, this is definitely the toughest to read. This is the one where I hesitate to recommend this book. Really, really, really look into trigger warnings before going into this book. This book is incredibly violent and disturbing, and that is going to be The Dumb House by John Burnside. And this is technically a classic story. In this book, we are following a man who was told at a young age about the story of Akbar and the Dumb House. And essentially, many generations, centuries ago, a very wealthy man and his advisors were talking about language and if it is learned or if it is just inherently known. And he decides to do a study where he takes a bunch of infants and he puts them into this manor. It is a nice location and everything. They have all of their needs met, and he staffs it only with mutes. So these children have absolutely no access to language whatsoever, no books, no nothing. And the goal is to kind of see, do they develop a new language? Do they develop the same language as humans already have? Or do they just never learn to speak? And this story doesn't really have a conclusion, and so our character decides to recreate that experiment with his own twins, by locking them in his basement. Now, let me read the first sentence of this book to give you an idea of how unhappy this story is. No one could say it was my choice to kill the twins, any more than it was my decision to bring them into the world. Each of these events was inevitability, one thread in the fabric of what might be called destiny. For want of a better word, a thread that neither I nor anyone else could have removed without corrupting the whole design. I chose to perform the laryngotomies, essentially removing like the vocal cords. I'm not a doctor, I don't know these words. If only to halt their constant singing, if singing is what you could call it, the ululations that permeated my waking hours and entered my sleep through every crevice of my dreams. So as you can see, the children die. He kills the children. And not only does he kill the children, but beforehand he performs a surgery on them. And throughout the story, we kind of follow him in his childhood, his kind of uncomfortable relationship with his mother, and then as an older man, and kind of what leads him to deciding to perform this experiment and the steps that he takes to gain access to these children. And when I tell you that this guy is a psychopath to the extreme, the trigger warnings in here are out the wazoo. The descriptions are incredibly uncomfortable, disturbing. Don't want to read this book ever again. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not reading this book again. We have death, we have the harming and sexual assault of people with mental disabilities, and we do have the torture of animals throughout this story. So pretty much any bad thing you may not want to read about is in this story. And to a degree, there's a part of me that wants to kind of punish the author for daring to write something so heinous, but at the same time, this was one of those books I just really did not want to put down because the writing was so well done. The author really draws you into this story with this disturbing fascination of this character's mind, because it is definitely not the kind of mind that you want to spend a lot of time in, but at the same time it is incredibly fascinating to know that there are people that think and act this way. This person does not see themselves as the bad guy. If anything, they see that they are doing the world a favor by doing this important experiment, and that they are some sort of excellent scientist. They see themselves as incredibly intelligent above others. They are most definitely a narcissist. They are not a likable character. If you don't like to read books with unlikable characters, don't even bother picking this up, because you will hate this guy. If you ever saw this guy on the street, you would push him into oncoming traffic without a second thought. But the writing is incredible, and just the pacing of the story and the way that throughout the story we get like little snippets of things that he has done throughout his life that just shows you more and more his descent into madness was so intriguing, so interesting, and the ending will have you pissed off. you will be pissed off by this ending. This ending does not have a hopeful ending. It does not have a satisfying ending, but at the same time, I feel like it was the perfect ending for this story. All right, guys, let's move into the second category. So category number 2 is a popular trope around this time of year, where we have people that are haunted by some sort of ghost. It is spooky season. It is time for the ghosts and ghouls to come out. This is actually the only category that has 4 books, and the first of them is going to be Summer Suns by Lee Mandello. I recently read this book and it is just vibes on vibes on vibes. When I was giving my initial review of this book, I kind of said that this book is good for people who like the relationship dynamics that you see in the Foxhole Court series, and also kind of has the vibes of The Raven Boys, as well as Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So those are kind of the vibes you can expect from the story. We are following a young man who is of college age, and he has been best friends with another man named Eddie for many years. And Eddie has gone to college ahead of him, and our character Andrew is supposed to follow him. However, just a few days before he's supposed to join Eddie at this university, Eddie dies of an apparent suicide. But our character Andrew is just not so certain that that is the case, because it seems that Eddie was looking into things he shouldn't have been looking into. Things that are tied to a curse that the young boys had put on themselves at a young age that allows them to see the dead. Throughout the story, we watch as Andrew kind of tries to see what Eddie's life was without him, what his life was at this university, trying to figure out what he and his roommate were looking into, the kind of relationship he had with his roommate's cousin, who seems to be kind of part of a group of people that drive fast cars and sell drugs. And so he's definitely seeing that Eddie got himself into a dark situation. But is it the drug dealers and car racers that are the problem? Or is it the academics who are all vying for the attention of their professors that got Eddie in the end? I absolutely loved the characters and the vibes of this story. I also really loved the writing. It is a very haunting, beautiful style of writing that is perfect for this time of year and this type of haunting story. I struggled with the pacing a little bit. It's one of those books that meanders a little bit in the middle and then kind of rushes to the finish line. So that is something I did struggle with. But for me, the vibes of the story and my interest in the character and his grief, and also kind of his exploration of his sexuality throughout the story, intrigued me enough to not take away too much enjoyment from the overall story. I definitely think that if you're looking for a darker story that's going to have a casual kind of unsettling vibe all throughout it, that this is definitely going to be the perfect book for it. It has just a hint of paranormal through it, but it also kind of shows the monsters that are not spirits but are very much alive in our everyday lives. So I had a great time with this. We'll definitely be reading more books by this author. Very talented writer, and I highly suggest that you guys check it out as well. Next book I have to recommend is Delicious Monsters by Lizelle Sandbury, and this is another YA horror in which we are following a young girl who is able to see ghosts. She has been able to see ghosts her entire life, and this has very much negatively impacted her life. She's not really able to have a lot of regular relationships because sometimes she struggles to know who is alive and who is dead, and this has caused her to violently lash out at people who she perceived to be threats, even though they aren't. She also lives with a mother who is a bit toxic. I would definitely say that her mother is rather manipulative when it comes to keeping her daughter in her control. And at the beginning of this book, the mother states that a family member of theirs has passed away and they have inherited a large manor that she is hoping to turn into a bed and breakfast. This will allow a consistent source of income, which is what her daughter wants, because one of the ways that her mother has manipulated into her staying is through finances. So she says, okay, if we have this bed and breakfast with a regular source of income, you have your money, you give me my portion, I'm leaving. So she decides that yes, we should go to this manor. And once she shows up there, she starts to realize that there aren't any ghosts around the house, which is rather unusual for her. Usually ghosts are just about everywhere. So she finds it a little bit suspicious that there are no ghosts here, especially one night when she sees a ghost running to the manor and then it never seems to come back. So she's like, is this house eating ghosts? Like, what does this mean? She starts to team up with a neighbor of hers, a fellow teen who is actually part of a psychic family, and they start to look into the dark past of this house. This book focuses a lot on toxic relationships. So it's not just about the possession of the body by a spirit, it is also about the possession of the mind at the hands of someone who is manipulating you into doing things that they want you to do. And you don't really notice just how chained to them you are until it is too late. So I really did enjoy kind of the parallels between those two discussions. I would say if you're looking for a haunted house story that has a bit of a twist to it, this is definitely the way to go. And up next, we have another audiobook that I listened to, and that is The Taking of Jake Livingston, and this is by Ryan Douglas. And this is another YA horror story in which we have a young man who seems to be easily possessed by ghosts. He's able to see them and they seem to be rather attracted to him because it is easy for them to interact with him. And unfortunately for him, one day he actually gets possessed by the spirit of a school shooter, which puts him and his fellow students into a lot of danger. This story is obviously rather difficult to read because we are following a young queer man. He's struggling to interact with his classmates. He's also struggling a lot at home. And on top of all of that, all of a sudden, he is being haunted by this very vicious killer who is a young white boy who had killed a lot of students in his school in a neighboring town, I believe. So obviously in America, school shootings are a very prominent issue. So this is something that would hit relatively close to home for some people. So do keep that in mind before opening up this story. We do get to hear the point of view of some people who have been the victims of a shooting, and that is very difficult to read about. I really like that the author gave us a few perspectives of the serial killers or mass shooters a point of view so that we could get an idea of what led him to this event. Does that cause you to validate his need to do so? Absolutely not. But it also goes to show you that these things don't come out of nowhere, and that the system and schools and parents and just society in general really needs to keep an eye on these things, because there are pretty big blaring signs that show you that someone is about to become a danger to those around them. So I really did enjoy some of the discussions that were had in this book. And overall, it wasn't my favorite read. I definitely feel like the author has some work to do with their writing and their pacing and all that jazz. But overall, I think it is a very important and impactful story and is definitely worth checking out this spooky season. And the final book on this haunted people list, we have The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White, and this is a book that I gave 5 stars. I read this for a book club with Is Bailey reading, and I think most people actually had a relatively good time with it, so I'm glad that the story went over really well. I gave it 5 stars. I have read Andrew Joseph White in the past and really enjoyed their writing. They do YA horror that is definitely leaning towards an older audience because he does not shy away from very detailed depiction of body horror. So just keep that in mind. So this is a historical story where we are following a trans main character. In this world, there are a group of people who are born with violet eyes, and having violet eyes means that you are able to kind of commune with spirits. However, only men are supposed to do this. Women who have violet eyes are essentially just sold off to the highest bidder to increase that bidder's chance of having a violet-eyed child themselves. Our character is obviously not interested in becoming a wife because they identify as male. Our character's name is Silas, and I believe in this book they are 16 years old, which their parents deem a good age to get married, and so they try to marry him off, and that does not go very well when Silas tries to take part in a ritual that would allow them to become a full-blooded member of the Speaker Society. It would give him kind of this mark that would open a lot of doors to him, and he's hoping to gain this mark and then kind of run off and become a doctor because he is very interested in surgery. He does a lot of like animal dissections and things like this, very unladylike things. However, he is unfortunately discovered doing this, and the father of the man he was supposed to marry says, hey, I still want your daughter to marry my son, so I will go ahead and pay for him to go to this boarding school for girls who suffer from violet-eyed sickness. So Silas heads off there, discovers a lot of other girls with violet eyes that have this sickness, but also gets approached by a few spirits of girls that have been there and have died there. And so it's up to Silas to kind of figure out what the heck is going on here. Why are girls dying here? What is this violet-eyed veil sickness? Is it even a real thing, or is it really just queer women, disabled women, or even just feminist women? And is it just women who will not allow themselves to be controlled? Along the way, Silas finds a wonderful ally, which I'm not going to tell you about, but I absolutely love that character. I think everyone loved that character. That character was just chef's kiss. They were so perfect. 10 out of 10 would date them. But the most disturbing parts of these stories are just the way that these young women are treated by the people at this school. They really are just trying to mold them into what men perceive to be the perfect woman, and any woman that does not fit into that mold is quite literally cut up in hopes of her fitting that mold. Like I said, quite a bit of body horror in here, so do check into that. I really did like Silas as a character. Not only is he a trans character, but he is also a autistic character, so he's got a lot of points against him according to this school. However, he is someone who has decided that he's going to live his own life and he's not going to let anyone get in his way to do so. So this was a very exciting story. I think it is slightly slower paced, but I do think that the climactic ending was definitely worth the slower pacing of the rest of the story. I really love Andrew's writing. He does an excellent job with the horror genre. He obviously also does a really great job with autistic characters. This is not the first time he's done an autistic character. And obviously, being a trans author himself, he does an excellent job of portraying the experience of a trans character. So this is a great horrifying story that is definitely worth checking out. All right, and that is the last of the second topic. Let's move into topic number 3. So, living with a monster. It is that time of year where all the monsters come out to play. So let's take a look at some books where a monster plays a relatively prominent part in the story. First, we have a well-known and rather well-beloved story, and that is going to be Slewfoot by Brom. And this is a story in which we are following a woman. I want to say her name is either Agatha or Abigail. I want to say Abatha. So I'm going to say Abatha. If that is incorrect, I apologize. I'm terrible with names. But essentially, she was married to this man and they lived on their farm and they were working this farm and improving this farm. And while they weren't exactly in love, she was like, he's a pretty good husband. He doesn't overly control me. He doesn't beat me, you know. The bar is on the floor and he stepped over it. However, this man has a very crappy brother, and his brother essentially comes one day and says, I sold your farm. And this meeting is kind of the beginning of the end. Shortly after this discussion, her husband ends up having an accident and dying, and Abatha is kind of left on her own to kind of uphold this farm in hopes that she can prove to her brother-in-law that she's capable of taking care of it and that he doesn't take it away from her, especially since now she is a widow. However, one day something comes out of the woods known as Slewfoot, and she and this creature make a deal. This book is set in a historical setting. We are living in a very religious town, and unfortunately it's one of those towns that uses their religion in a way that hurts people more than it does good. It's definitely a very oppressive society, specifically to women, and this is one of those books where you have to like a revenge story. This book does not shy away from just killing the people that the character wants to kill. She is done trying to be the bigger person. She is done trying to bend to the rules. She's like, I'm done with that. I'm gonna take what I want, and if you're gonna stand in my way, I'm gonna cut you down, quite literally. So this story I thought was rather satisfying. I thought it was quite fun. We have this interesting Slewfoot creature and his not quite children, but his followers, these kind of woodland like monsters. Slewfoot has kind of woken from a slumber and is not really sure who or what he is or what his purpose in life is, and so he is trying to figure that out alongside trying to help our female character to keep what is rightfully hers and to hurt those who have hurt her first. So I had a really great time with this story. I listened to the audiobook and I highly suggest reading it that way. I thought it was the perfect balance of horror yet while also being a lot of fun to listen to. I myself love a good revenge story, a good you brought this on yourself, a good oh you thought you were the good guy, yeah no I'm gonna prove you that you are not the good guy. This is kind of the story of if witches actually had the power that the witch hunters claimed they had, the witch hunters wouldn't have stood a chance. Like, they would have been done. They would have been dead. So lots of fun, but also quite horrifying, especially when you are reading about actually more so the things that the people of the church are doing rather than what the monster and his little witch friend are doing. Up next, we have A History of Fear by Luke Dumas, and in this book we are following Grayson, who seems to believe that he is possessed by the devil. At the start of the book, we realize that Grayson has killed a classmate. He has been sentenced to prison, and he is claiming that it is the devil who made him do it. This book takes place in Scotland. We have an American student who has always dreamed of going to school in Edinburgh, I believe is where it's located, because his father went there many years ago. And when he arrives there, first things seem to be going relatively well. Yet one day a man approaches him to help him kind of ghost write a story about the devil in Scotland. And our character is at first reluctant to take this job because when he was a child, he actually suffered from some sort of mental ailment where he had a very intense and debilitating fear of the devil. And he has kind of overcome that, but he's worried that taking on this job will cause it to resurface. And considering how the story goes, It kind of does. This is a slower paced story. The monster is not as obvious. In fact, we never really know, is the monster really there, or is it all in our character's head? Is he having another mental breakdown like when he was a child, or is the devil actually in Scotland and is looking for this man to write this book about him because he is wanting the people in Scotland to fear him as they once did. I thought that this was a really interesting story. I have to admit, I was a little concerned about the ending until I read like the final sentence, and then I was like, okay, I see what you did there, and that was incredibly clever. I think one of the things that really made the story interesting is that our character is a bit of a narcissist. He's not like the greatest person, so you don't really see the best in him. When he's talking about the fact that the devil made him kill this person, you're looking at what you've read about him and you're like, but honestly, I feel like you could kill someone. It's not like you were reading about him and being like, yeah, no, this is so out of character for him. He is definitely someone who is a bit pompous. He, kind of sees himself as above other people. So I do really think that this book did a great job of kind of keeping you guessing at what direction it's gonna go. Especially with the kind of academic background of it, I think it is the perfect fall time read. And for the final book of Living with a Monster, we have another well-beloved story, and that is going to be A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a retelling of the story of Dracula from the point of view of one of his brides. It is a, what do they call it, epistolary, where it's written in letter format, where our woman has killed Dracula and is now kind of writing letters about why it came to this. This book is told from the point of view of Constanta, who is Dracula's first bride. He essentially saves her when her village is taken out by an army, and he takes her on as his bride, and she loves him for very many years. However, we start to see that this relationship is incredibly toxic, and our character starts to realize that more and more as Dracula brings two other people into their relationship. And though she loves these other people, she also sees how Dracula mistreats them and the abuse that the others kind of accept as part of their everyday life. And she decides it's time for the three of them to kind of free themselves from the monster that is Dracula. The writing in this story is spectacular. It is so beautiful, so haunting, so addictive to read through this story. We are just following them through years and years, and good times and bad times, and you just want to consume it all. You want to consume every part of these characters' lives. Honestly, I could read another book following these characters quite easily. I really enjoyed her relationship with the other two characters. I love the discussions of abusive relationships for the majority of this book. We are dealing with psychological abuse, emotional manipulation, but as the years go on, we kind of start to see things escalate a little bit and then start to become a bit more physical. We also get the discussions of there are different types of people who can fall into the clutches of an abusive partner. Constanta could kind of be seen as a bit of a weak-willed character. She doesn't stand very well on her own for the majority of the story. She was a young peasant girl. She wasn't very well educated. She was brought in by this wealthy, strong, handsome man. From the very beginning of their relationship, he was her superior, her savior. She would literally not be alive without him. So you, in a way, could easily see her falling under his spell. But on the other hand, we have another character, Magdalena, I believe was her name, and she is a very wealthy, intelligent woman with a ton of connections to very important people. and she falls under a spell just as much as Constanta did. So it really goes to show you that there is just not one type of person who can fall victim to these abusers. And it just shows you the power of manipulation that these people have and how they can use it against different types of people. So I really thought this was an interesting story. Really liked Constanta's character arc as we kind of watched her come into herself, to save not just herself, but the other two brides, I guess bride and groom, of Dracula, because she loves them, and honestly she loves herself. And so a lot of self-respect for her. Really enjoyed this story, the writing, the characters, as well as the way the author decided to finish this story up. So if you haven't read this, I definitely suggest you give it a try this fall season. All right, guys, let's see what the final category is. All right, something I really enjoy in my horror and thrillers is a very intense, unexpected ending. Sometimes an ending of a story can completely change my rating and feelings about a book. And these are 3 books where the ending of the story completely changed my perspective of the entire book. The first book is one that I have recently read, and this is Keep This to Yourself by Tom Ryan. This is a queer young adult thriller story in which we are following Mac about a year after a serial killer has gone through their small town and killed 4 people, his final victim being Connor, one of Mac's best friends. One day, Mac is going through some comic books that his friend Connor had given him the day before he died, and he finds that there is actually a note from Connor asking him to meet him in the cave in which he had died. Mac then suspects that Connor knew who the killer was, and that because he never showed up, Connor ended up confronting the killer alone and being killed. Driven by guilt and curiosity about what happened to his friend, he decides to investigate and figure out who this serial killer was. Was it really just a drifter going through town like the police said, or was it a local? Along the way, he meets Quill, the cousin of one of the other victims, and the two of them team up to find out if the killer still lurks among them. In a way, this story is your classic YA thriller mystery. We kind of have a young man stumbling through the steps of an amateur investigation. He's desperate, he's unsure about what he's doing. He feels like everyone is potentially against him. He feels like he needs to keep things to himself. He feels like a distrust in the police because he's gone to them in the past and they've kind of brushed off what he says. So he feels very much like he is the only person that could discover what happened. Along the way, we discover that there are a lot more secrets in this town than we expected. Despite being a small town, it seems that maybe people don't know each other's business as well as you would expect in a small town. Is there a connection between the people that were killed? Was Connor supposed to be the final victim, or did he just get in the way of the killer? Who was supposed to be the final victim? All of these interesting questions that our character is looking into, and honestly, it ends up being not exactly what he or we the readers expected, and that is what I really loved about the story. For the most part, I was feeling this was a pretty solid 3.5 star read. I'm like, I'm having a good time, you know. I think it's relatively realistic. This is how I would act in an investigation. I would be high anxiety the entire time that I'm looking into a deadly serial killer. So I can definitely relate to her character Mac, who's like, I don't know what I'm doing. But at the same time, it very much felt like something that I have read before. And then all of a sudden, subtly, things start to shift as some people start confessing things to our main character that he has potentially been blind to due to his relationship to certain people. So I really enjoy the fact that we kind of had that gradual change, so that when we were confronted with the reality of the situation. We weren't completely blindsided, but at the same time, we were still a bit taken by surprise that this is how things turned out. So I had a really great time with the ending of the story. I definitely had to applaud the author for it. Up next, we have another young adult story, and this is Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. I have enjoyed another Tiffany D. Jackson book, but this one is definitely my favorite. In this book, we are following a young high school girl who kind of comes back from summer vacation, shows up on her first day of school, and her best friend is not there. And she's very confused about this. She kind of tries to ask some people about it. A lot of people are like, oh, you know, she's staying with her father at this time, so that's why she's not here. But our girl's like, but why is she not texting me? She's not responding to any of my text messages. What is going on here? And everyone seems to kind of be brushing off her concerns. And of course, we as the readers are like, oh, we're following two young Black girls. And unfortunately, people don't take the disappearance of people of color as seriously. So that's kind of the direction we expect the story to take. And that's not quite what happens. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you what goes on in the story. I really can tell you very little about the books in this category because I can't tell you about the ending. It's the ending that gets me, and I don't want to spoil anything. I really enjoyed the discomfort that this story made me feel. I feel like we're definitely following an unreliable narrator in the story where it's very hard for us to be like, okay, what's real, what's not real? Is her character over exaggerating? Is she missing something? Is she being overly paranoid? We get some flashbacks into their friendship, and it was a pretty intense friendship, so you can definitely see why our character's feelings are so intense about her friend's disappearance. But that intensity of the friendship and also kind of some of the bullying and stuff that the girls faced side by side definitely lends to the discomfort that you feel while reading this book. But really throughout the whole story, what really worked for me was this feeling of what is going on here, because we have a girl who has disappeared. It seems that she is gone. It seems that other people knew she existed, but they don't really care that she's gone. And so I was very much getting those when no one is watching vibes from Alyssa Cole, and it makes it very difficult to trust any of the people around her character. It makes you feel like your character is in a very unsafe situation, and so the stakes of the story seem incredibly high. The way that this story ends is rather unexpected. It was rather unexpected for me. I didn't see it coming, and it was rather shocking in a very heartbreaking way. I really like the way Tiffany D. Jackson handled this topic. I think that it was incredibly well done, and done with respect to people who have gone through things like this, and it definitely convinced me that I needed to read more books by Tiffany D. Jackson. So if you're looking for a book with an ending that is going to stick with you for a long time, then this is definitely a book worth checking out. And the final book is going to be The Whisper Man by Alex North. This is the only adult story in this section. We are following multiple points of view in this story. We are following a father and son who have recently moved to a new town that many years ago suffered from a killer called the Whisper Man, who would whisper outside of children's windows and then those children would disappear. It seems like it has been years since the Whisper Man has been there. However, one day Jake, the new boy in town, states that he heard someone whispering outside his window, and when he disappears, police realize that a copycat might be in town. So we're also following the point of view of a police officer who had captured the original Whisper Man and is now trying to figure out who exactly has kidnapped this child and if he can find the child before it is too late. This is once again a high stakes story. We are running against the clock here. We have a child that has been kidnapped by someone potentially incredibly dangerous. We have both a police officer and a father who are desperate to find this story. I listened to the audiobook and I really enjoyed that experience of it. I really enjoyed getting multiple aspects of the crime from multiple points of view, including the criminal and our victim as well. It really gave us a well-rounded story and allowed us to get enough information about what was going on to really feel fear about the situation, while simultaneously not giving us enough information to figure out just what the hell is going on. On top of that, this story does focus a little bit on father-son relationships, which is a topic that I do quite like reading about. I think a relationship between a father and a son is incredibly important, and so I do like reading about it, especially when there's some strain between the two of them and kind of watching them work together to kind of build a stronger relationship. Our father and child in the story decided to move because the mother or wife of this family has passed away, and the two of them are feeling very lost. She was kind of the glue of their family, and definitely this child being kidnapped has kind of woken the father up to the fact that their relationship hasn't been the best. He hasn't been the best father, and he's desperate to find his son, not just because he doesn't want his son to die, but because he wants to be given the opportunity to fix and strengthen that relationship with that son. So that adds an extra layer to the story that I really enjoyed. But as all books in this section, it was the way the author decided to end this book that had me gasping, because it is not just the final chapter of this book, but the final sentence of this book that had me reeling for days to come. Trust me, that final sentence and the realization of what it means, and just like the sinking feeling that you get when you read it, makes the entire story well worth it. All right, guys, that was a very long list of books, including some books that I haven't read for a year or two, so I hope my descriptions of them were okay. I would love to know any recommendations you have of books that you think would fall into any of these categories, or even if you have some great fall recommendations that wouldn't fall into any of these categories, I would love to hear them down below, and I'm sure your fellow subscribers would love to hear them as well. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!